Deep in the throat of a moray eel, a few inches behind the mouth you can see, there is a second set of jaws, not hidden in the poetic sense, an actual, physical, mechanical second set of jaws with its own hinge, its own dedicated muscles, and its own rows of curved teeth that point backward, like fish hooks. Most of the time, this apparatus rests quietly down, near the eel's gullet, folded and waiting, doing absolutely nothing. Then, the moray bites a fish, and the moment those front teeth sink in, the hidden jaws wake up. They launch forward out of the throat, slide the length of the skull in a fraction of a second, reach up into the mouth, and clamp onto the struggling prey from the inside. Then they retract, dragging the fish backward down the throat the way a climber hauls in a rope, hand over hand, except the hands are jaws, and the rope is alive. For a long time, nobody knew this was happening. Scientists had seen the strange second jaws in dissected morays going back well over a century, sitting there in the throat like a spare part, with no obvious purpose. Plenty of fish carry teeth in the throat, so the assumption was that morays used theirs the way everyone else does, as a sort of internal food processor for prey that had already been swallowed. The truth stayed out of sight because it happens inside the animal, in the dark, in about a tenth of a blink. It took high-speed video to catch it. In 2007, two researchers at the University of California, Davis, a biologist named Rita Mehta and her colleague Peter Wainwright, filmed reticulated moray eels feeding and published what they found in the journal Nature. The footage showed something no one had ever documented in any vertebrate ever: the throat jaws leaping forward, out of the throat and into the mouth, actively grabbing prey and transporting it backward. A second bite, launched from inside the body. Mehta, who now runs her own lab at the University of California, Santa Cruz, had essentially discovered that one of the ocean's most familiar predators swallows in a way no other backboned animal on Earth is known to use. Sit with the strangeness of that for a second. A moray eel is a fish. It has a mouth, like you. It has teeth in that mouth, like you. And then, where you have a soft throat that simply squeezes food downward, it has a second skull piece, armed with teeth, mounted on muscles long enough to throw the whole assembly forward and pull it back like a grappling hook. If you found this design in a science fiction movie, you'd call it excessive. The moray carries it to dinner every day. And here's the part that turns a cool anatomical party trick into a genuine question about how bodies work. The moray isn't some lonely exception, a one-off freak in an otherwise orderly world where teeth stay politely in mouths. Once you start looking, teeth show up all over the animal kingdom in places that seem, at first, like mistakes. There are fish whose throats hold crushing plates strong enough to crack sea urchins like walnuts. There are crabs and lobsters that chew their food with teeth anchored inside the stomach, actual grinding teeth working away in the gut, driven by one of the most studied little clusters of neurons in all of neuroscience. There are sharks whose entire bodies are shingled in miniature teeth, tens of thousands of them, each one built with the same internal architecture as the teeth in your own head, complete with a pulp cavity and a nerve supply. There's a fish in Florida that carries dozens of teeth mounted along the outside of its snout like a hedge trimmer. There's a deep-sea predator whose teeth are transparent, engineered at the scale of billionths of a meter so that light passes through them without a glint. There's a spiny little grazer with 5 self-sharpening teeth arranged in a structure so elegant that Aristotle himself described it more than 2,000 years ago. And engineers are still reverse engineering it today. Throats, stomachs, skin, snouts. Almost anywhere, it seems, except where we assume teeth belong. So the question this whole story hangs on is simple to ask and surprisingly deep to answer. Why does the body keep building teeth in places that have nothing to do with a smile. Is a tooth in a lobster's stomach even the same kind of object as a tooth in your jaw? Or does it just happen to look similar? What decides where a tooth is allowed to grow? And underneath all of that sits the biggest question of the lot, one that paleontologists have been arguing about for more than a century, and that got a startling update just last year. Where did teeth come from in the first place? Because the fossil record has an answer. And I'll tell you now, it's not the answer most people would guess. The earliest chapters of the story of teeth do not take place inside anyone's mouth. By the time this is over, you may find that the teeth you brush every morning have a stranger origin than almost any other part of your body, and that the ache you feel when ice water hits a molar is a message from 500 million years ago. But we start where the evidence is freshest, with the eel, because the moray's double bite is the perfect entry point into the logic that runs through every case we're going to meet. Nature doesn't install equipment like this for fun. A second set of jaws is expensive. It costs energy to build, energy to maintain, and developmental precision to wire up correctly. If morays have one, it's because something about their way of life made the ordinary fish solution stop working. And the ordinary fish solution, it turns out, is one of the great unsung tricks of life on Earth. It's called suction feeding, and once you understand it, you'll understand why nearly every fish you've ever seen is, functionally, a living vacuum cleaner, and why the moray had to become something else. Watch a goldfish eat, or a bass, or a grouper, and the actual capture is almost invisible because the fish barely touches its food. What it does instead is expand. In a few thousandths of a second, the fish flares the sides of its skull, drops the floor of its mouth, and throws its jaws forward, and the volume inside its head suddenly increases. Water rushes in to fill the space because water has no choice, and anything floating in that water, a shrimp, a minnow, a drifting worm, gets pulled in with it. The prey is, for all practical purposes, inhaled. Big predatory fish like largemouth bass can generate suction flows so abrupt that a prey fish an inch away is simply gone, folded into a stranger's mouth before its nervous system has registered a problem. And suction doesn't stop at capture. Most fish also use pulses of suction to move food backward through the mouth toward the throat, a technique researchers call hydraulic transport. The fish essentially swallows by sipping its meal further inside, stage by stage, riding on little currents of water it creates on demand. It's a magnificent system, and it has one requirement that a moray eel can't meet. To generate serious suction, you need a big, expandable head. You need wide cheekbones to flare, a deep mouth cavity to inflate, room for all that machinery to swing outward. A moray is built on the opposite plan. It's a rope with a face. Morays hunt inside coral reefs, threading their bodies through crevices and tunnels barely wider than themselves, ambushing octopus and fish in spaces where a base-shaped skull could never fit. Everything about the moray is narrowed, elongated, and compressed for that lifestyle, and the price of the skinny head is that the vacuum cleaner barely works. Mehta and Wainwright measured it. When a moray strikes, the water in front of its mouth hardly moves. Where other fish inhale their prey, the moray must do it the old-fashioned way, with a lunge and a bite, like a snake. Which creates a problem you've probably never had to think about, because suction solved it for every other fish. Once you've bitten something, how do you get it from your teeth to your throat? You can't use your tongue the way we do. A moray has nothing like our muscular tongue. You can't tilt your head back and let gravity help, the way a gull does with a stolen French fry, because underwater, there's no meaningful gravity assist, and letting go of a struggling octopus for even a heartbeat is a good way to lose dinner. The moray is holding a powerful, slippery, actively fighting animal in its front teeth, in a tight rock crevice, with no vacuum to sip it backward. Evolution's answer was to take the tooth-bearing gill arch machinery that ordinary fish keep in their throats for processing food, stretch its muscles into long slings, cut away some of the surrounding skeletal clutter, and turn the whole thing into a projectile. The pharyngeal jaws of a moray travel forward relative to the skull by a distance that, scaled to a human body, would be like your voice box launching up into your mouth to help you eat a sandwich. When Meta described the mechanism, she compared it to the double jaws of the creature from the Alien films. And for once, the Hollywood comparison is fair, except the movie monster got there second. Morays have been running this design for millions of years. There's a detail in the mechanics that I find quietly beautiful. Those backward curved teeth on the pharyngeal jaws act like the barbs on a fishing hook, so every cycle of the grab is a ratchet. Forward, clamp, pull back. The prey can only move one direction, deeper. The moray doesn't need to crush or kill its meal in the mouth first. It can swallow prey alive and whole, walking it inward bite by internal bite. That's why a moray can take an octopus, an animal that's essentially all muscle and bad intentions, and win in a confined space. And it also explains something divers have known for decades without knowing why. Morays sit in their holes with their mouths open, breathing in slow gapes, showing those needle teeth, and people read it as a threat. It mostly is just breathing. With such a narrow head, the eel has to pump water over its gills through the same skinny passage everything else uses. But behind that open mouth, out of sight in the dark of the throat, the second set of jaws is riding along with every breath, cocked and patient. I think that's a more honest kind of menace than anything the eel's face does. Now, I said morays borrowed and modified machinery that ordinary fish already had. And this is where the story swings wide, because that machinery is one of the least appreciated facts in all of vertebrate biology. Teeth in the throat sound like a bizarre exception. In fish, they're close to standard equipment. The structures are called pharyngeal jaws, from the pharynx, the throat, and they're built out of gill arches, the bony hoops that support a fish's gills. A fish embryo grows a series of these arches down each side of its head, and the front ones long ago became the biting jaws all vertebrates carry, a transformation so ancient it predates trees. The rear arches kept their day job holding gills. But in bony fish, some of those rear arches did something extra. They sprouted teeth of their own and became a second workstation for handling food. So the typical fish is running a two-stage system: front jaws catch, throat jaws process. Tens of thousands of fish species, from minnows in a creek behind a Missouri farmhouse to tuna crossing the Pacific, are carrying some version of a toothed throat right now. A goldfish, of all things, has no teeth at all in its visible mouth and chews everything with teeth in its throat, grinding food against a horny pad at the base of its skull. People keep an animal with hidden throat teeth in a bowl on their kitchen counter and worry about the dog. Once you see the two-stage system, you start to understand why evolutionary biologists get so excited about it, because separating capture from processing changes the rules of what a mouth is allowed to become. Think about the compromise your own mouth makes. Your front teeth nip and cut, your back teeth grind, your jaw muscles and joint have to serve both jobs at once, and every tooth has to fit in one row in one bone. A fish with pharyngeal jaws has uncoupled the problem. The front mouth can specialize entirely in catching, becoming a suction funnel, a forceps, a spear, whatever the prey demands, while the throat independently specializes in whatever destruction the diet requires. Each set of jaws is free to evolve without dragging the other along as a compromise. Biologists call this decoupling, and it's widely credited with helping fuel some of the most explosive diversification in vertebrate history. The cichlid fishes of Africa's Great Lakes, freshwater cousins of this story, radiated into hundreds of species partly on the flexibility of their remodeled pharyngeal jaws. Snail crushers and algae scrapers and fish hunters all riffing on the same throat hardware. The ocean ran the same experiment with its own cast, and that's where things get loud. Because if you want to hear what throat teeth can really do, you go to a reef and you listen for the wrasses. Wrasses are one of the great fish families of the sea, hundreds of species strong, and their signature move is a pharyngeal apparatus upgraded from a food processor into an industrial crusher. In a wrasse, the lower throat jaws are fused into a single sturdy element, shaped a bit like a stout letter Y, braced against upper tooth plates, with heavy molar-like teeth mounted on surfaces that can be driven together by thick muscle. The animal is carrying a nutcracker behind its gills. Off the coast of Southern California lives a spectacular example, the California sheephead, a big wrasse that patrols kelp forests, eating some of the best defended food in the ocean: sea urchins, crabs, mussels, snails. A large male sheephead approaches an urchin, a ball of moving spines that would make most predators reconsider their choices, picks it up with its front teeth, and passes it back. The throat jaws do the rest, cracking the urchin's shell from the inside of the fish, and the sheephead spits out the spines and swallows the soft interior. Divers can hear the crunching. The fish's whole ecological identity, its role as one of the animals that keeps urchin populations from mowing down entire kelp forests, is built on teeth no one can see. The wrasses have plenty of company in the throat-crushing business, and some of it swims within casting distance of American piers. Along the Gulf Coast and the Atlantic seaboard lives the black drum, a heavy-shouldered fish that can grow past 50 pounds and earns its name by thrumming its swim bladder like a bass drum during spawning season. Black drum make their living on oyster reefs and clam beds, and they're equipped accordingly. The back of the throat holds broad plates studded with rounded cobblestone teeth, backed by crushing musculature strong enough to crack mature oysters, shell and all. The fish takes the whole oyster in, grinds it in the throat, sorts the wreckage internally, and passes the shell fragments while keeping the meat. And anglers cleaning a big drum sometimes find those pharyngeal plates and mistake them for something fossilized because they look more like a piece of quarry equipment than part of a fish. Oyster growers along the Gulf know the drum in a different way as a professional problem. A school of big drum can work over a restoration reef or an aquaculture lease with the efficiency of a demolition crew, which has made the species a genuine subject of study for people trying to bring back American oyster beds. New England has its own version of the gild in the tautog, the stout buck-toothed blackfish of rocky bottoms and wrecks, which picks mussels and crabs off the structure with its front teeth and delivers them backward to grinding plates in the throat. Ask anyone who's hoisted one over a jetty rail, heavy and slick and smelling of shellfish, whether the machinery works. None of these animals advertises any of this. From the outside, a drum is a gray fish with a downturned mouth, and a tautog is a buck-toothed grump, and the industrial crushing floor each one carries behind its gills stays perfectly hidden until the day you look down the throat, which is, come to think of it, the running theme of this entire story. And then there's the parrotfish, which took the wrasse toolkit and turned it into geology. Parrotfishes are essentially wrasses gone vegetarian, or mostly vegetarian, and their front mouth has fused its teeth into the structure that gives them their name, a beak, built from something like 1,000 individual teeth cemented together in around 15 rows, with new teeth continuously forming behind to replace the worn front line. A team led by the physicist Pupa Gilbert used some of the brightest X-ray sources in the country to look inside parrotfish beaks a few years back, and found the biting tips are made of interwoven crystal bundles of a mineral called fluorapatite, arranged in a structure that ranks among the stiffest and most wear-resistant biominerals ever measured. The fish need every bit of it because their food is rock. A parrotfish grazes by biting the surface of a coral reef, scraping and gouging away at the thin film of algae growing on and inside the dead coral skeleton, and it takes real limestone with every mouthful. Snorkelers in Hawaii or the Florida Keys often hear them before seeing them. A distinct scrape crunch like someone slowly chiseling the reef, which is precisely what's happening. But a beak only breaks rock into chunks. Chunks of limestone aren't food. So behind the gills, The parrotfish runs the family crusher in its most extreme form, a pharyngeal mill, in which upper and lower tooth plates work against each other like millstones, grinding coral rubble and algae together into a fine slurry. The digestive system strips out the organic matter, the algae, the microbes, the little invertebrates that lived in the rock, and everything else continues through the fish and exits as sand. Genuine sand. Soft, white, coral sand, the kind resorts put on postcards. A single large parrotfish is estimated to produce several hundred pounds of it per year, and for the biggest species, some estimates run toward 1,000 pounds or more. A figure that sounds absurd until you remember the animal spends most of its waking life biting a reef, and every bite has to go somewhere. Multiply by millions of parrotfish, and by centuries, and you get one of my favorite facts in marine science. Studies of certain tropical beaches have concluded that a large share of the sand, in some famous cases estimated at up to 70% of it, was manufactured in exactly this way. If you've ever lain on a white sand beach in the tropics, there's a reasonable chance some meaningful fraction of what you were lying on had previously passed through the throat teeth of a fish. I love that the postcard version of paradise is in part an industrial byproduct of hidden dentistry. So the throat, at least in fish, turns out to make perfect engineering sense as a place for teeth. It sits on the food's route no matter what. Everything a fish eats must pass that way. It's close to the body's core muscles and braced against the skull, so it can host slow, powerful crushing that a fast snapping front mouth can't afford. And because it's out of the prey-catching business, it can be as ugly and specialized as the diet demands. The mystery of teeth and throats mostly dissolves the moment you think of teeth as tools that belong wherever the work is. Ask where the work is, and the throat answers before the mouth does. Every meal a fish wins has to squeeze past that one narrow spot, and a fish that can finish the job back there gets to spend its whole front end on catching, which is exactly the freedom the wrasses and the parrotfishes spent millions of years cashing in. But hold on. I've been using the word tooth freely for structures in mouths and structures in throats, and pretty soon I'm going to use it for structures in stomachs and structures in skin. And at some point, an honest narrator has to stop and ask the question a careful scientist would already be shouting from the back row. What actually counts as a tooth? If a lobster grinds food with hard bumps in its stomach, is that a tooth or just a hard bump with a good publicist? The question sounds pedantic. It turns out to be the master key to this entire story, because biology has a surprisingly crisp answer, and that answer is what lets us tell the true teeth from the imposters, and eventually lets us trace teeth back to their birthplace. Here's the answer. To a biologist, a tooth is defined by how it's built, and the construction recipe is remarkably specific. A true tooth, whether it's in your jaw, a shark's mouth, or a fish's throat, is a layered structure with a soft living core called the pulp, threaded with nerves and blood vessels. Around that pulp is the main body of the tooth, a hard tissue called dentine. And dentine is distinctive stuff. It's laid down by cells that retreat as they work, leaving behind thousands of microscopic parallel tunnels, so that under a microscope, dentine looks like a honeycomb of tiny straws all pointing at the pulp. Cap the dentine with an even harder, glassier mineral layer. Enamel in mammals like us, a closely related tissue called enameloid in most fish, and you have the finished object, pulp, dentine, hard cap. That three-layer sandwich is the signature, and researchers have a name for the general category, an odontode. Every true tooth is an odontode. Hold that word, because it's going to do a lot of work before we're done, and the ending of this story essentially belongs to it. The recipe involves more than materials. It specifies a manufacturing process. A true tooth always forms the same way, from a conversation between two tissues, a sheet of surface tissue, an epithelium, the kind of layer that covers skin and lines mouths, folds down and meets a pocket of deeper cells, and the two exchange chemical signals back and forth like contractors arguing over a blueprint. You put down mineral. No, you fold here first. Now signal the neighbors to hold position. The dialogue runs on a small, ancient set of signaling genes, the same short list that gets reused all over animal development, and one of the most important voices in the exchange is a gene that laboratory scientists, in a moment of 1990s whimsy the field has never lived down, named Sonic Hedgehog after the video game character. The name is real, dentists in training have to learn it, and I refuse to apologize for how much that delights me. When the negotiation finishes, the deep cells become the dentine factory. The surface cells lay down the hard cap, and a tooth erupts. Every tooth you've ever grown ran this program. So did every tooth of every shark that's ever lived. And here's why the definition matters so much for our tour of misplaced teeth. The fish throat teeth we just met, the moray's grappling hooks, the sheephead's nutcrackers, the parrotfish's millstones, every one of them passes the test. Real pulp, real dentine, real enameloid, built by the real epithelial negotiation. These are teeth in the fullest sense. The tissue doesn't care that it happens to sit behind the gills, which immediately raises the stakes on everything still ahead of us. Because now, each time we find something tooth-shaped in a strange location, we get to run the check. Same recipe or convincing forgery? The answers are going to split in ways I promise you won't fully predict, and each split teaches us something different about how evolution builds hardware. First stop, an animal that took the true tooth program and ran it across its entire body. Run your hand along a shark, from nose toward tail, and the skin feels smooth, almost silky. Reverse direction, and it becomes sandpaper aggressive enough to scrape skin off your palm. Fishermen have known this forever, and for centuries people put the fact to work. Dried shark skin, under the old name shagreen, was used by woodworkers and cabinet makers as a natural abrasive for smoothing fine furniture. And sword makers in Japan wrapped ray and shark skin around sword grips because the gritty surface wouldn't slip in a wet hand. What none of those craftsmen could have known is what the grit actually is. Put shark skin under a microscope and the surface resolves into thousands upon thousands of tiny, overlapping tooth-shaped structures, each a fraction of a millimeter across, lying like shingles on a roof, all pointing tailward. They're called dermal denticles, which translates, with no poetry lost, as little skin teeth. And the name is anatomically exact, which is the part that stops people. Cut one of those denticles in half, and you find the full 3-layer sandwich we just established as the definition of a tooth. A pulp cavity at the center, living tissue, blood supply, nerves. Dentine around it with those signature microscopic tubules. A cap of hard, glassy enameloid on the outside. Each denticle sits anchored in the skin with its own little base plate, the way your teeth anchor in your jaw. Each one forms in the embryo through the same tissue negotiation, the same folding epithelium, the same deep cells, the same ancient signaling genes, Sonic Hedgehog and its colleagues, arguing the same blueprint into existence. A biologist handed a thin slice of the material, with no label, could honestly struggle to tell you whether it came from inside a mouth or off the animal's back. A shark is, in the most literal structural sense available to science, an animal wearing a suit made of teeth. The count runs to tens of thousands on a single animal, every one of them built by the same negotiation that built the teeth in its jaws, and every one of them replaced on the same logic when it wears out. Somewhere in that arithmetic, the word suit stops being a figure of speech and starts being a parts list. The suit does real work, and the work is surprisingly varied. The armor function is obvious enough, a flexible chainmail against abrasion and parasites. The famous function is drag reduction. Those tailward-pointing ridges manage the water flowing over the body in ways that let a shark slip along with less turbulence, a discovery that inspired competitive swimsuits and experimental aircraft coatings, and which caused enough havoc in elite swimming that the sport's governing body eventually banned the full-body suits after records fell in absurd numbers. But the function I want to sit with is quieter. Denticles make a shark silent. A big part of why a shark can appear beside a seal or a diver without any warning wake of sound is that this tooth-shingled surface smooths and quiets the water sliding over it. The teeth on the outside of the body are stealth equipment. When people say sharks are perfect predators, they usually mean the jaws and the senses. The skin was ahead of both. Denticles even solve their problems like teeth. A denticle, once formed, is a finished mineral object. It can't enlarge, any more than one of your molars can stretch. So as a shark grows, it does what mouths do. It sheds and replaces, and it adds new denticles to cover the expanding acreage, keeping the armor continuous from birth to death. Sharks are running tooth replacement across their entire surface area for their entire lives. And once you know that, the famous conveyor belt of shark mouth teeth, the endless rows marching forward to replace every lost fang within days or weeks, starts to look like local intensification of a body-wide policy. The mouth of a shark is simply the neighborhood where the skin's standard practice got turned up to industrial speed, all of which sets up the sentence this whole section has been circling, the one that rearranges how you see a shark forever, and that I'm going to plant here and deliberately leave half-grown because its full meaning belongs to the end of our story. Anatomists have recognized for a long time that a shark's mouth teeth and its skin denticles are, at root, the same organ. Same tissues, same layers, same developmental program, same replacement logic, different sizes, and different addresses. You can even trace the transition physically. Follow the skin denticles toward the jaws of some sharks and rays, and the structures shift gradually, getting larger and more organized as they approach the mouth. Until somewhere around the jaw margin, you stop being able to say confidently which category you're looking at. The line between the shark's skin and its smile is ours. We drew it because our own bodies have one, and we assumed everyone's did. Keep that thought warm. It's the seed of the finale. But first, because no discussion of teeth and skin is complete without the most flamboyant example on Earth, we need to go to Florida and meet an animal that took its skin teeth, sorted them into a row, mounted them on a blade, and turned the whole arrangement into a weapon so distinctive that it's on the logo of power tool companies. I mean the sawfish, and I want to be precise here because sawfish are among the most misunderstood animals in American waters, and also among the most endangered. A sawfish is a ray, a flattened relative of sharks, and the saw, technically the rostrum, is an extension of its snout, a long, flat blade of cartilage, in big animals stretching several feet, edged on both sides with a row of white points that everyone instinctively calls teeth. The small-toothed sawfish, the species that lives in United States waters, mostly in the shallow coastal fringes of southern Florida, can reach lengths reported at over 15 feet, of which the saw makes up roughly a quarter, and it carries something like 24 teeth per side. In 2003, it became the first marine fish ever listed under the United States Endangered Species Act, its population having collapsed over the 20th century, largely because a toothed blade on your face is close to the worst possible accessory in a world full of fishing nets. Here's the twist the anatomy hands us. Those saw teeth pass every tissue test, dentine, hard cap, the works. But they're odontodes of the skin lineage, enlarged rostral denticles, cousins of the little shingles on a shark's back that grew huge and lined up in formation, and their growth policy gives the game away because it follows skin rules with one crucial difference from the sharks. A study published by researchers including Monique Welton and the tooth evolution specialist Moya Meredith Smith worked through the development of these structures And the upshot is that a sawfish's saw teeth are permanent equipment. They erupt in a fixed series and then grow continuously from the base throughout the animal's life, the way a rodent's incisor does, compensating for wear at the tip. What they can't do is regenerate. Snap one off at the root, on a net, a rock, a careless encounter with a boat, and it's gone forever. The saw carries the gap for life. The mouth of the same animal, meanwhile, a modest little crushing mouth on the underside of the head, replaces its teeth in conveyor belt fashion like any respectable shark relative. One animal, two tooth populations, two entirely different replacement policies, and the difference maps precisely onto the ancient division between mouth and skin. Biology rarely hands you such a clean, natural experiment. For most of the 20th century, nobody actually knew what the saw was for. The guesses were all over the place. A rake for digging clams, a defensive sword, a sensory probe. Serious behavioral answers only arrived in the last couple of decades, notably from work by the Australian researcher Barbara Wieringer, who studied sawfish feeding and published, in 2012, the first real documentation of what the blade does. It does two jobs at once. The saw is studded along its surface with electroreceptors, the same kind of sense organs sharks use to detect the faint electrical fields of living muscle, so the blade works as an antenna, sweeping through murky water and reading the heartbeats of fish the sawfish can't see. And when it finds one, the same instrument becomes a weapon. The sawfish swipes sideways with startling speed, striking fish out of the water column, sometimes impaling them on the lateral teeth, then pins the stunned prey against the bottom and eases over it to feed with that small mouth underneath. An antenna, a sword, and a serving fork made of skin teeth run on the same sensory wiring that, as we'll see at the very end, may be older than mouths that bite. There are moments in biology when an animal seems to be showing you its own evolutionary receipts, and the sawfish, hunting by feel with a blade of electrified denticles, is one of them. The conservation note deserves one honest beat before we move on. Small-toothed sawfish were once found from Texas around Florida and up the Atlantic coast toward the Carolinas. Today, the core of the United States population survives mainly in southwest Florida, in places like the Everglades backcountry and Charlotte Harbor, protected by the Endangered Species Act listing, and slowly, cautiously, showing signs of hanging on. Scientists have even learned to read the teeth themselves as history books. Because a rostral tooth grows continuously and never gets replaced, its layers record the chemistry of the water the animal lived through year by year like tree rings. So researchers can take a single tooth from a museum saw and reconstruct where that individual spent its life, decades after it died. A tooth that never lets go of its past, on an animal running out of future. If any structure in this story earns the word poignant, it is that one. So far, every strange tooth we've met has passed the tissue test. Throat teeth, skin teeth, saw teeth, all true odontodes, all products of the same ancient program, just deployed at unusual addresses. It would be easy to walk away believing the rule is simple, that everything hard and pointy in nature is a relocated tooth. The next animal exists to break that belief cleanly, and it lives in a trap on the bottom of a New England bay. It's time to talk about what's happening right now inside the stomach of a lobster. The American lobster does something at dinner that sounds like a biology exam error. It swallows first and chews second. A lobster's mouth parts shred food only coarsely. The claws crush and tear. The little limbs around the mouth pass fragments inward, and lumps of mussel, crab, fish, whatever the seafloor offered, go down the short esophagus into the front chamber of the stomach. And there, inside the animal, behind its eyes, the actual chewing begins. Mounted in the wall of that stomach chamber is a mechanism called the gastric mill. 3 hard calcified teeth, 1 central tooth flanked by 2 lateral teeth, arranged around the chamber like the jaws of a machinist's chuck. Muscles outside the stomach pull on them in coordinated rhythm, and the teeth grind against each other, squeezing, rasping, and shearing the food between them until chunks become paste. Crabs run a version of the same equipment. So do crayfish and shrimp like krill, and a whole sweep of the crustacean world. When you eat a lobster, the last meal it ever chewed was chewed in a place you'd call its gut. Some people find that unsettling. I find it clarifying because it asks the right question. Why would chewing ever need to happen in a mouth at all? The mouth is just where food happens to enter. The stomach sees everything the mouth sees, slightly later. If your body plan can build grinding surfaces there, the location works fine, and the lobster is proof, walking, or at least scuttling. Now run the test we built. Slice one of those stomach teeth and look for the sandwich: pulp, dentine, enameloid. It fails on every layer. There's no pulp, no nerve-threaded living core, no dentine, no honeycomb of tubules, no enameloid cap. A lobster's gastric teeth are made of cuticle, the same chitin and protein composite that forms the animal's entire shell, locally thickened and stiffened with calcium minerals into hard grinding surfaces. They form the way shell forms, from the general body covering that, in an arthropod, also lines the front and back sections of the gut. And they never met an epithelium negotiating with neural crest cells, never expressed the tooth gene program, never heard from Sonic Hedgehog. Structurally speaking, the lobster chews with specialized fingernails. By the strict definition, these are our first imposters: tooth-shaped, tooth-functioning, and no relation whatsoever to teeth. And the imposters have a trick that no true tooth in this entire story can match. A lobster, like every arthropod, must molt to grow, wriggling out of its old shell in one of nature's more harrowing routines. The gut lining is cuticle too, remember, and it comes out with the rest, which means that when a lobster molts, it sheds the lining of its own stomach, gastric mill included, teeth and all, and walks away soft and toothless while a new set hardens inside it. Every true tooth we've met replaces itself piecemeal, one lost unit at a time. The lobster replaces its entire chewing apparatus wholesale, on a schedule, as a package deal with its skeleton. There are even crustaceans that, before molting, park calcium reserves as little stones in the stomach wall, biological savings accounts called gastroliths, to help pay the mineral bill for rebuilding. Imagine budgeting for a new set of teeth the way you budget for winter tires. That's a lobster's year. Here's the part of the lobster's story that nobody expects, the part that quietly made stomach teeth famous far beyond marine biology. Those 3 grinding teeth need choreography. Chewing is rhythm, coordinated force applied in repeating patterns, and the lobster's stomach rhythm is conducted by a tiny knot of nerve cells called the stomatogastric ganglion, sitting on top of the stomach and containing, in total, only about 30 neurons. 30? Your brain has tens of billions. And because 30 neurons is a number scientists can actually get their arms around, recording from every single cell, mapping every connection, this little stomach-chewing circuit became one of the most completely understood pieces of nervous system on the planet. Researchers, most famously Eve Marder at Brandeis University in Massachusetts, have spent decades on it. And the lessons that came out of those stomach teeth reshaped neuroscience. The discovery that the same small circuit can be retuned on the fly by chemical modulators to produce entirely different rhythms, like a band switching genres mid-song, changed how scientists think about brains in general, including ours. Ideas that inform how we understand human brain circuits were worked out by eavesdropping on the nerves that chew inside a lobster's gut. Somewhere in that fact is a lesson about where wisdom is allowed to come from. So the stomach teeth are fakes, by our strict tissue definition. And yet they chew, they coordinate, they even taught neuroscience its manners, which sharpens a theme that's been building under this whole story and deserves to be said plainly. Evolution does not care about our categories. Chewing is a physics problem. Hard surfaces, applied force, repetition, and physics doesn't check your ancestry. Vertebrates solved it with odontodes, mineralized skin organs. Arthropods solved it with calcified cuticle, two completely unrelated construction kits arriving at objects so functionally similar that we can't stop using the same word for both. Engineers call this convergence, the way sharks and dolphins converged on the same torpedo shape from opposite ends of the family tree. Teeth, it turns out, are one of the great convergence magnets in nature. Present a lineage with the problem of breaking hard food, wait long enough, and something tooth-shaped will appear, built from whatever materials the lineage had lying around. And if you think chitin fingernail teeth are as strange as materials get, the next family of imposters is about to raise the bid dramatically, because it includes teeth made of iron. Consider the snail. Specifically, consider the fact that snails are among the most heavily armed animals in the sea, which is not a sentence most people are prepared for. Nearly every mollusk that grazes or hunts, snails, whelks, limpets, chitins, carries an organ called a radula, and the standard description, a tongue covered in teeth, undersells it. The radula is a flexible ribbon, often narrower than a grain of rice, carrying rows upon rows of tiny hard teeth. Dozens to hundreds of rows, sometimes thousands of teeth in total, arranged like the tread pattern on a conveyor belt. The animal presses the ribbon against a surface and rasps, and the teeth scrape material inward toward the gut. New rows are continuously manufactured at the back of the ribbon, while worn rows break off at the front, so the radula is a tool that never stops replacing itself, a belt sander with a lifetime supply of fresh grit. The teeth themselves are chitin, like the lobster's stomach mill, but mollusks discovered something arthropods never leaned into. You can impregnate those chitin teeth with metal minerals and turn a scraper into serious industrial equipment. If you've ever walked a beach from Maine to the Carolinas and picked up a clamshell with a single, perfectly round hole punched through it, neat as a drill press, you've held the crime scene evidence of a radula at work. The driller was most likely a moon snail, a smooth, glossy predator that engulfs clams in a foot of muscle the size of a dinner plate and then begins, with monstrous patience, to bore through the shell. It presses its radula against the clam's armor and rasps, and it cheats. A gland near the mouth, called the accessory boring organ, secretes acidic, enzyme-laced fluid that softens the shell's mineral. So the snail alternates chemistry, then grinding, chemistry, then grinding. Progress is estimated at around 0.5 millimeter of shell per day, and a thick clam shell can take days of continuous work, the snail holding its victim the entire time. The finished hole is countersunk, beveled wide at the surface, and narrowing inward, which is exactly the shape you'd engineer to keep drilling stable, and so distinctive that paleontologists identify moon snail predation in fossil shells millions of years old by the geometry alone. Then the proboscis goes through the hole, and the clam is eaten in its own home. Moon snails will drill other moon snails, cannibalism by drill press, and honestly, dignity was never part of this story. Whelks and oyster drills run their own versions along every American coast. Oyster drills are such efficient shell borers that they rank among the serious enemies of commercial oyster farms. All of it. Every hole. Cut by teeth on a tongue. In an animal most people file under garden pest. But the radula's masterpiece is strength. And for that we go to the limpet, the little conical hat of a snail clamped to wave-blasted rocks on rocky shores. Limpets graze algae off bare rock, scraping stone all day, every day, and their radular teeth are reinforced with densely packed nanofibers of goethite, an iron oxide mineral. In 2015, an engineer named Asa Barber and his colleagues published measurements of limpet tooth material in a Royal Society journal that startled the materials science world. pulled to the breaking point. Samples held at levels ranging roughly 3 to 6.5 gigapascals, numbers that dethroned spider silk, the reigning champion, and made limpet teeth the strongest known biological material on Earth, with the best samples reaching into territory otherwise occupied by engineered carbon fibers. Part of the secret is that the mineral fibers are so thin, thinner than a wavelength of visible light, that they fall below the size where cracks can get organized. So the material's flaws stop mattering. The strongest biological material ever tested is a tooth, and its owner is a thumb-sized snail that spends its life licking rocks in the tide zone. Nature has a sense of humor about status. And then there's the chitin, which decided that iron reinforcement was for amateurs and went fully magnetic. Chitins are the armored ovals you find suctioned to rocks at low tide, wearing 8 overlapping shell plates like a tiny armadillo of the sea. The largest species in the world lives along the American Pacific coast, from California up through Alaska. The gumboot chitin, a reddish-brown slab that can exceed a foot in length and is known affectionately to tide poolers as the wandering meatloaf. The nickname is fair. The teeth are anything but comical. Chitins scrape hard rock for a living, gnawing off the crust of algae and the film of organisms growing on stone, and the working edges of their radular teeth are capped with magnetite, an iron oxide so hard that measurements on chitin teeth have recorded the greatest hardness and stiffness of any known biomineral. By some comparisons, several times harder than human tooth enamel. Magnetite is, as the name advertises, magnetic. Hold a strong magnet near the business end of a chitin radula, and the teeth respond. There's an animal on the rocks of Monterey and Puget Sound, shaped like a misplaced pot roast, whose teeth would stick to your refrigerator. Materials scientists study the gumboot chitin with genuine reverence because the animal manufactures those magnetite caps at ocean temperature, in seawater, guided by proteins, a feat of low-energy precision manufacturing that human industry, with its furnaces, can't yet match. One research group at the University of California, Riverside has spent years working out how the chitin lays down its iron, in hopes of borrowing the process for battery and solar cell materials. The animal, of course, uses it to eat rocks and slowly, generation by generation, sand down the coastline. Radulas leave their signature scraped into stone. Some tide zone rocks carry grazing scars that are essentially the tooth marks of centuries. Step back and look at what the mollusks have shown us. Chitin teeth, iron fiber teeth, magnetite teeth. An entire parallel civilization of dental engineering, none of it, by the strict developmental definition, teeth at all. No pulp, no dentine, no odontode program. The radula is the mouth tool of a lineage that split from ours somewhere in the depths of time, before either side had invented anything hard, and everything since has been independent invention. When a moon snail's drill and a sawfish's blade both fall out of the word tooth on a technicality of embryology, you can react 2 ways. You can decide the definition is pedantic, or you can notice what the strict definition buys us. It turns the word tooth into a tracer, a die we can follow through evolutionary history, distinguishing one particular 500-million-year-old invention and its descendants from all the lookalikes. We're following the die because it leads somewhere specific. And the next animal on the tour is the strangest case yet because it's a vertebrate, our own remote kin, an animal whose mouth is legendary precisely for its teeth. And by the strict definition, every single one of those teeth is fake. The sea lamprey looks like the result of a dare. It's an eel-shaped fish, ancient in body plan, with no jaws at all. And where a face ought to be, it carries a wide, flexible suction disc lined with concentric rings of hooked amber teeth, spiraling inward toward a rasping tongue-like piston that carries teeth of its own. The whole arrangement resembles a drain opening ringed with fish hooks, and photographs of it have been reliably horrifying magazine readers for a century. The lamprey uses the disc exactly the way it appears to. It clamps onto the flank of a living fish, seals tight, sets its hooks, and then the toothed piston rasps a hole through scale and skin so the lamprey can feed on blood and body fluids, sometimes for days, riding its host like a saddlebag with opinions. An anticoagulant in its saliva keeps the wound open. Host fish often die. In the American imagination, the sea lamprey is a monster with a rap sheet, because when shipping canals let it slip past Niagara Falls into the upper Great Lakes in the early 20th century, it found lake trout populations with no defenses and helped collapse one of the biggest freshwater fisheries on the continent within a few decades. By the estimates fishery agencies publish, a single lamprey can kill on the order of 40 pounds of fish during its parasitic phase. The United States and Canada have jointly funded lamprey control ever since, and the recovery of Great Lakes fisheries is one of the quiet long wars of American conservation. Now do what we've trained ourselves to do. Look at the teeth. They pass the eyeball test better than almost anything in this story. Sharp, curved, arranged with menacing order. And they fail the tissue test absolutely. A lamprey's teeth contain no mineral at all. No dentine, no enameloid, no calcium phosphate, nothing a paleontologist could dig up. They're made of keratin, the same protein as your fingernails, your hair, a bull's horns, hardened into translucent cones that sit as caps over soft living tissue, and are shed and replaced as they wear, like a snake shedding skin. Functionally superb, structurally a costume. The lamprey, a bona fide vertebrate, a cousin of everything with a backbone including you, chews into fish with hardware closer to a toenail than a tooth. Biologists are careful to say it plainly. Lampreys have no true teeth, which raises an obvious and surprisingly deep question. Why would a vertebrate improvise teeth out of fingernail material if vertebrates own the odontode program, the real tooth technology? The likely answer sends a chill down the timeline of this whole story. Lampreys belong to a lineage that branched off from the rest of us extraordinarily early, before jaws existed, and, according to a broadly supported reading of the fossil record, possibly before true mineralized teeth existed at all. Lampreys may never have had the program to lose. Their keratin fangs would be an independent workaround, a solution invented by a lineage that missed the invention of the real thing. If that reading is correct, then the lamprey's horrifying mouth is a window into the world before teeth, a demonstration of what vertebrate life resorts to without the odontode toolkit. And that pushes the question we've been circling from the start to the front of the stage. If lampreys are older than true teeth, then true teeth had a birthday. Somewhere, in some animal, the pulp dentine enameloid sandwich was assembled for the first time. Where? In whose body? And in which part of that body? It's time to go find the first tooth. But before we descend into deep time, there are two modern marvels left on the tour. Two animals that show just how far the ocean has pushed tooth engineering since that birthday. And the first of them hunts in the dark with teeth designed to be invisible. A quarter-mile down in the Pacific off California, and far deeper still on its daily travels, lives a fish about the length of a pencil that owns one of the most extreme mouths, relative to size, in the entire ocean. The Pacific black dragon, one of the deep-sea dragonfishes, is a ribbon of an animal, scaleless, and so profoundly black that laboratory measurements of related deep-sea fish skin have found it absorbs more than 99% of the light that touches it, blacker than fresh asphalt, blacker than almost anything humans manufacture. Down where it hunts, in the twilight and midnight layers of the sea, there's no sunlight worth mentioning. What light exists is made by the animals themselves. The blue-green sparks and glows of bioluminescence, the flash of a startled shrimp, the lure of an anglerfish, the running lights of lanternfish. In that world, an ambush predator faces a design problem that no shallow water hunter ever confronts. Its own teeth can betray it. A mouthful of standard fish teeth, white, mineralized, glossy, would catch every passing flicker of bioluminescence and glint like a road sign. For a predator whose entire strategy is to be a piece of missing space that prey swims into, shining teeth are a fatal flaw. The dragonfish's solution: teeth made of glass, or close enough. Its fangs, needle-thin and so long the fish can barely close its mouth around them, are transparent. Hold one up in the light and you can read text through it. In the deep, hanging open in the dark, they simply aren't there. The prey sees blackness and swims toward it, and the blackness closes. In 2019, a team at the University of California, San Diego, led by the materials scientist Mark Myers, with the doctoral researcher Audrey Velasco Hogan and the Scripps Institution of Oceanography marine biologist Dimitri Dehaene, published the answer to how the fish pulls this off. And it turned out to be one of the finest pieces of nanoscale engineering ever found in a living thing. The startling part is what the teeth are made of. Nothing exotic. Hydroxyapatite and collagen. The same two ingredients as your teeth and mine. The transparency comes entirely from architecture. In an ordinary tooth, the outer mineral is built from crystals large enough to scatter light, and the dentine underneath is threaded with those microscopic tubules we keep meeting, each one a light-scattering flaw. The result is opaque and white. The dragonfish rebuilds both layers at a finer scale. Its enamel-like coat is made of hydroxyapatite grains only about 20 nanometers across, embedded in a glassy, disordered matrix, and 20 nanometers is so far below the wavelength of visible light that the light waves plow through as if the material were uniform, the same principle that makes glass clear. And the dentine inside has been purged of its tubules entirely, rebuilt as a fine felt work of nanoscale rods, with nothing large enough to bounce a photon sideways. Same ingredients as a human molar, reorganized at the billionth of a meter scale, and the result goes from bathroom tile white to invisible. The team also found the nanostructure makes the surface unusually hard for its size, which a needle that thins sorely needs. When engineers say they study nature for ideas, this is the kind of blueprint they mean. The paper explicitly points toward transparent armor and tough, clear ceramics, materials humans still struggle to make well, prototyped by a pencil-length fish that will never know it contributed. I want to flag what the dragonfish adds to our bigger argument, because it's easy to file it under mere wonder. Every case so far has been about where teeth can go. The dragonfish shows how deeply a tooth can be re-engineered once evolution has a reason. The odontode program places teeth at strange addresses and then retunes their internal crystal architecture, layer by layer, against a specific physical problem, in this case the optics of ambush lighting. The program is a full manufacturing platform with adjustable settings all the way down to the nanometer. Hold that thought against the Limpet's crack-proof iron fibers and the chiton's magnetite caps from the imposter side of the ledger, and a pattern locks in. Wherever teeth are found, true or fake, the material itself is under ferocious, precise selection. Teeth are among the hardest working objects in any body. Nothing about them is casual. Whatever else a body is willing to build cheaply, this is not on the list. The material gets tuned until it survives the job, and then it gets tuned again when the job changes, and the tuning reaches all the way down to how the crystals inside are stacked. That's a lot of evolutionary attention for a bump on a snout or a plate behind a gill. That leaves one last stop on the modern tour, and I've saved it for the end of this section, because it's the oldest continuously running joke in zoology. The animal with 5 teeth, no face, and a chewing machine so architecturally strange that the founder of biology himself stopped to describe it. and we still call it by his name 23 centuries later. Aristotle, working through his history of animals in the 300s before the Common Era, described the mouth apparatus of the sea urchin as resembling a horn lantern, the old kind with panes, set in a frame. And the name stuck. To this day, anatomy textbooks call the sea urchin's jaw system Aristotle's lantern. It's among the oldest anatomical terms still in active scientific use, a piece of language that's outlived empires, and it describes a structure that would look futuristic on a factory floor. Here's the machine. A sea urchin, that walking pincushion of the tide pools, carries in its underside a globe-shaped skeleton of about 40 interlocking mineral pieces, operated by dozens of muscles, holding 5 long, wedge-shaped teeth arranged in a ring, points inward, like a 5-jawed drill chuck. The whole lantern can protrude from the mouth, splay its 5 teeth apart, press them against rock, and scrape them together over and over all day. Urchins graze algae the way chitons do, by eating the surface of the stone it grows on, and their teeth are made of calcite, the same crystal as limestone and chalk, which should be a problem because the rock many urchins chew on is often harder than calcite, and any engineer will tell you that a soft tool grinding a hard surface loses. Purple sea urchins on the Pacific coast nonetheless carve themselves snug, round hiding pits in solid rock, sometimes over generations. Whole shorelines from California northward pocked with urchin-dug sockets. Where the rock is soft enough, urchins have even bored into steel pier pilings concrete jackets. The soft tool wins. The question is how, and the answer, published across a series of studies in the 2010s, including work on deep-water pink urchins by teams at Northwestern University and the University of California, San Diego, is that urchin teeth are designed to break. Deliberately, constantly, and precisely. An urchin tooth is a composite calcite fibers and plates bound in layers with slightly different compositions, and the layers aren't equally strong on purpose. The tooth carries, along its grinding face, a region of hard, dense material that does the cutting, backed by arrangements of calcite plates bonded by weaker interfaces. As the tooth wears against rock, stress builds exactly where the design intends, and the outer dulled layers chip away along those weak seams, flaking off like the segments of a box cutter blade, exposing fresh, sharp material beneath. The tooth sharpens itself by shedding its own bluntness. Researchers who studied the deep-sea pink urchin captured the process with electron microscopes and mechanical testing rigs, essentially filming the tooth flaking itself sharp. And engineering groups have openly discussed copying the trick for self-sharpening industrial tools. Blades that hone themselves by losing exactly the right pieces. Meanwhile, the urchin pays for the strategy with permanent construction. Each of the 5 teeth grows continuously from its upper end, new mineral added at the top as the working tip wears and flakes away below. A slow conveyor of tooth sliding down through the lantern for the animal's entire life. Growth at one end, controlled demolition at the other, sharpness as a steady state. Aristotle would have enjoyed knowing the lantern was also a factory. For the record, and by now you can probably run the test yourself, urchin teeth pass no part of the odontode exam. Echinoderms, the family of starfish and urchins, split from our lineage long before teeth existed, and their calcite tooth and lantern system is yet another independent invention, a third or fourth parallel dentistry depending on how you count. Vertebrate odontodes, arthropod cuticle mills, mollusk radulas, echinoderm lanterns, 4 kingdoms of chewing, 4 unrelated toolkits, 1 relentless physical problem. If you ever needed a single sentence to explain what biologists mean when they say evolution isn't a ladder, you could do worse. Then, the ocean contains at least 4 completely separate inventions of the tooth, and the strongest one belongs to a snail. So, let's gather up what the whole tour has established. Because we've earned a moment of altitude before the final descent into deep time. Teeth, true teeth, the pulp dentin enameloid kind, turn out to be portable. The same developmental program runs in the mouth, in the throat, and across the skin, and evolution has shuffled those installations freely, intensified here, abandoned there, repurposed into saw blades and grappling hooks. Teeth also turn out to be endlessly re-engineerable, down to nanometer crystal grain sizes, when physics demands it. And teeth turn out to be so useful that unrelated lineages keep counterfeiting them from fingernail protein, shell material, iron, and chalk. Underneath all of it sits one common logic. A tooth is a solution to contact between a body and something harder than the body, and that contact can happen anywhere. Food touches the throat and the stomach as surely as it touches the lips. Water and rock and parasites touch the skin. The address list of teeth in nature is simply the address list of places where life meets resistance. But portability has a deeper explanation than convenience, and this is the piece of modern biology that ties every strange case in this story into a single idea. The odontode program is what developmental biologists call a module, a self-contained genetic subroutine, a bundle of instructions that, once triggered in a patch of tissue, unfolds the whole sequence: the folding epithelium, the signaling conversation, the dentine factory, the mineral cap, without needing to be reinvented or re-specified from scratch each time. Modules are how evolution gets creative on a budget. A feather, a limb, an eye lens, a tooth. Each is a subroutine that can be called in new places, at new times, at new sizes, by relatively small mutations in the switches that control where genes turn on. That's why a shark can run tooth production across its entire body while a parrotfish runs it in two separate workshops, mouth and throat, tuned to two different specifications. Nobody had to evolve the tooth twice. The program was written once, 500 million years ago, and everything since has been deployment decisions. And deployment runs in reverse too. Switch the program off in a territory and the equipment vanishes. Plenty of fish lineages have shut down tooth production in parts of the mouth or in the mouth entirely, and leaned on their throat teeth alone, and the logic extends beyond teeth. Entire organs get decommissioned when diets change, the way some fish lineages, as we've explored before on this channel, abandoned their stomachs altogether and deleted the genes for acid digestion along the way. Bodies work like software installations, with programs being copied, launched, patched, and uninstalled across the tissues over evolutionary time, which finally arms us to ask the question properly. If the tooth program is a module that can run anywhere and demonstrably does, then the question, where did teeth come from, splits into a sharper, stranger form. Where did the program run first? When the odontode subroutine was assembled for the very first time in some Cambrian or Ordovician animal in some forgotten sea, was its first job in the mouth, biting food, the job we consider obviously primary, or somewhere else entirely? For more than a century, paleontologists have been split into two camps over exactly this, and the two camps have names that sound like wrestling moves: outside in and inside out. The argument between them is one of the longest-running and most fiercely contested debates in vertebrate paleontology, and unlike most century-old academic arguments, this one has recently been moving. To understand it, you need to meet the animals at the bottom of the stack, the first vertebrates that left hard parts behind. And the first thing you need to know about them is the detail this whole story has been built to deliver. They had no teeth, and they had no jaws, and they were nonetheless covered in dentine. Drive into the foothills west of Cannon City, Colorado, and you're about as far from the ocean as America gets: high desert, piñon pine, the Rockies shouldering up behind you. In the 1890s, crews working through a band of rock there called the Harding Sandstone started turning up something that didn't belong: fragments of bony armor, small plates and shields sculpted with fields of tiny bumps, packed into stone that had once been the floor of a shallow sea. The fragments made their way to the great Yale paleontologist Charles Walcott, and they turned out to be, at the time, the oldest vertebrate remains ever found anywhere on Earth. The animals they belong to have names now: Astraspus and Eryptychius, and ages: roughly 450 to 460 million years, the Ordovician period, 100 million years and change, before the first backbone thing crawled onto land. Reconstructed, Astraspus was a creature maybe the size of your hand, shaped like a swimming shield, a bony headpiece covering its front half, a scaled tail behind, two small eyes peering out through gaps in the armor, and a mouth that was just an opening, no jaws. Jaws had not been invented. No teeth anywhere near that mouth. Nothing in the Ordovician had teeth in its mouth. These animals fed, as far as we can tell, by straining or slurping small particles, mud-grubbing filter feeders, in a sea ruled by giant water scorpion relatives and shelled squidkin, which is a humbling portrait of our ancestry. For our first act, we were armored Roombas, hiding from bugs. But the armor is the whole story. Those little bumps sculpting the surface of Astraspus's shield, each one a few fractions of a millimeter across, are called tubercles. And when paleontologists cut thin sections through them and put them under the microscope, they found a familiar sandwich. Each bump has a core of dentine, real dentine, with the signature radiating tubules laid down around a small internal cavity that once held soft living tissue, and in various early forms, the surface carries harder, enamel-like capping. Pulp space, dentine, hard cap. You know this structure. You've known it since we first looked down a moray's throat. The oldest vertebrate hard parts on Earth, the founding fossils of our whole lineage's skeleton, are shields paved with odontodes, the very objects we've been chasing through throats and stomachs and skins. And they sit on animals that couldn't bite, in an age when biting with jaws did not exist. Whatever teeth are, the fossil record's opening statement about them is blunt. The tissue showed up first as skin. Skin armor on jawless filter feeders, tens of millions of years before there was any such thing as a mouth that could use a tooth. Let that reorder itself in your head, because most people carry the opposite assumption without ever examining it. The natural guess is that teeth began as teeth, in mouths, for eating, and that scales or armor came later as spin-offs. The rocks say otherwise. Dentine, the defining tooth tissue, spent its early career entirely on the outside of the body, and the fossil record of those early jawless fish is generous. It just keeps going. After Astraspus, the seas of the Silurian and Devonian filled with a parade of jawless armored fish, the heterostracans with their massive bony shields, the thelodonts, whose entire bodies were covered in tiny loose scales, each scale, and this detail matters enormously in a few minutes, built like a miniature tooth, dentine crown, pulp cavity, and all. Thelodont scales are so tooth-like that when they turn up isolated in the rock, as they usually do, specialists sorting the fragments have struggled at times to say whether a given object came from an animal's flank or, and here's the loose thread, from somewhere deeper. Museums hold drawers full of these things, millions of tiny tooth-built scales from fish that had no teeth. If you wanted to design a fossil record specifically to tease paleontologists about the origin of teeth, you could hardly improve on this. So the stage is set for the debate, and it's worth stating both positions with real respect, because each side is backed by serious evidence and serious people, and the honest status of this argument, as of today, is live. The first position is the one the fossils we just met seem to shout, and it's called outside in. It goes like this. The odontode program was born on the skin, building protective sensory armor on jawless fish, generation after generation for millions of years. Then, when jaws finally evolved, remodeled, as you may remember, from the front pair of gill arches, the skin program did something momentous and almost embarrassingly simple. It crossed the border. Odontodes that had always grown on the outside of the lips continued, in some lineages, over the margin of the newly armed mouth and onto the biting edges, where they found themselves in a new line of work. Bigger ones did the work better. Selection took it from there, organizing rows, speeding up replacement, sharpening crowns, and the tooth as we know it was off on its half-billion-year career. In this view, the mouth inherited its entire arsenal from the skin. Your molars are the descendants of skin armor that immigrated inward across the lip of some Silurian fish, and a shark, wearing its full-body coat of denticles with true teeth at the jaw margin where the sizes grade into each other, is essentially a living diorama of the whole event, the before and after displayed on one animal. Outside In has a lot going for it. It has the deep time sequence. Skin odontodes verifiably existed long before oral teeth. It has the shark diorama. It has the developmental unity we've leaned on from the beginning. The fact that denticles and teeth run the same genetic program, which is exactly what you'd expect if one is the other, relocated. And in 2022, it picked up a neat piece of modern support from an unexpected direction, a study of Escherichia mira, an extinct sawfish-like ray from the Cretaceous seas that once covered much of North America, whose rostral saw teeth, remember, are enlarged skin denticles, showed that the enameloid capping those skin structures was built with a sophisticated multi-layered crystal architecture fully comparable to the enameloid of true shark mouth teeth, and in some respects more elaborate. The point being, the skin program can build tooth-grade, even premium-grade hardware entirely on its own, out on a snout, whenever selection asks, with no mouth required anywhere in the process. There's no engineering gap between scale and tooth that would make the border crossing implausible. The road from skin to smile is, materially speaking, flat. So why is there a debate at all? Because of a handful of fossils and facts that refuse to sit quietly, and the second camp, Inside Out, has built its case on them with real skill. The Inside Out school, championed over the years by researchers including the London-based tooth evolution specialist Moya Meredith Smith, whose name you've already heard on the Sawfish work, starts with an awkward observation about geography. If teeth are just skin scales that wandered over the lip, then tooth-like structures inside the body, deep inside, past the mouth, down in the gill region, shouldn't predate or outrank the mouths. And yet, fossil jawless fish have been found carrying denticles in their throats. The star witness is a thelodont called Loganellia scotica, from Silurian rocks in Scotland around 430 million years old, one of those fish covered head to tail in tooth-like scales and, crucially, jawless. Inside its gill and throat region, paleontologists found denticles too, and some of them are organized, fused into little whorl-like sets rather than scattered randomly like body scales. Organized tooth structures, in the pharynx, in an animal with no jaws, tens of millions of years before anything could bite. The inside-out reading, the deep throat lining, was running its own odontode operation, independent of the skin, before jaws existed, and when jaws arrived right there in the gill arches, in the pharynx's own neighborhood, the local internal denticle program is what armed them. In that story, teeth were born inside, in the throat, and the moray eel's launching pharyngeal jaws start to look like a homecoming, a return to the tissue's ancestral heartland. I'll admit that the first time I understood that implication, it rearranged my whole mental map of the eel. The inside-out camp brings developmental evidence too, and it lands. Your body's outer covering and your gut's inner lining come from two different embryonic sheets, the ectoderm outside and the endoderm inside, and the classic outside-in story quietly assumed teeth belong to the outside sheet, since that's where skin denticles live. But when researchers actually traced which sheet builds teeth in living animals, the answer came back messy. In bony fish with throat teeth, those pharyngeal teeth arise in endoderm-lined territory deep inside, where skin has never reached. Experiments in the 2010s on mice showed some of their teeth forming from endoderm-derived lining, others at the seam where the two sheets meet, and the teeth came out identical either way. Whatever the tooth program cares about, it's apparently not which embryonic sheet it's running on. Outside-in partisans read this as proof the module is portable, so a skin origin remains perfectly workable. Inside-out partisans read it as removing the only barrier that made an internal origin seem impossible. Both readings are fair, which tells you why this argument has legs, and, to my mind, it also tells you the two camps have been converging on something neither fully owned at the start. The program itself doesn't respect the border. Only history knows which side of the border it started on, and history keeps its records in stone. And the stone holds one more set of witnesses, the strangest of all, which any honest account has to put on the table even though they complicate everything: the conodonts. For more than a century, geologists sorting through marine rocks kept finding minuscule tooth-shaped objects, combs, blades, platforms with cusps made of calcium phosphate, tooth mineral, and so abundant that oil companies learned to use them for dating rock layers. The animal that owned them was a complete mystery until the 1980s, when body fossils finally turned up in Scotland. The conodont animal was a slim, eel-shaped creature a couple of inches long, with big eyes, a notochord, muscle blocks arranged like a fish's. In most modern analyses, a genuine early cousin of vertebrates, and its mouth region carried an apparatus of those phosphatic elements, apparently for grasping and slicing food. Conodont elements go back on the order of 500 million years, comfortably older than Astraspis and its armored kin. Tooth-shaped, tooth mineral, mouth-mounted feeding structures, older than the oldest known skin armor. Case closed for inside out? Not so fast, because when specialists examined how conodont elements grew, layer by layer, the construction came out backwards by odontode standards, built by accretion in ways no true tooth uses, without the epithelial folding signature, and most current analyses conclude the conodont apparatus is yet another independent invention, a fifth parallel dentistry to add to our lobsters and limpets and lanterns, evolved by close cousins of vertebrates rather than an ancestor of our actual teeth. Most, though not all, a minority of researchers has argued for a deeper connection over the years, and the conversation isn't fully closed. Science doesn't tidy itself up for the cameras, and I'd rather hand you the actual state of play than a false victory parade. Here's where the referee work of the last 2 decades has actually moved things. Synchrotron imaging, the same class of ferociously bright X-ray sources that let Pupa Gilbert see inside parrotfish beaks, got turned on the fossils at the heart of the debate. In 2012, researchers led by Martin Rucklin and Philip Donoghue at Bristol scanned the jaws of ancient armored fish called placoderms, the first jawed vertebrates, from Devonian rocks of Australia around 380 million years old, and settled one sub-argument outright. Placoderms, long suspected of being toothless slicers, grew true teeth, with dentine and pulp, developing in ordered succession at their jaw margins. Teeth are therefore at least as old as jaws themselves. The first biters were already tooth makers. Follow-up scanning of other early jawed fish traced how oral teeth and lip margin denticles relate, and the emerging picture, championed in a much-cited review Donoghue co-wrote under the title The Ins and Outs of the Evolutionary Origin of Teeth, is a kind of disciplined synthesis. The odontode program was born once, on the outside of the body, as the skin armor of jawless fish, and teeth arose when jawed vertebrates deployed that external program at the new jaw margins, inside territory, where it settled in and specialized. Outside in at the level of deep origin, with the inside camp's evidence absorbed as proof of how early and how enthusiastically the program colonized interior real estate. Not every specialist signs on. Loganellia's throat whorls still stand as a genuine anomaly, waiting for more fossils. But if you forced the field to bet today, the smart money says your teeth trace back to skin, which would make the final twist almost too perfect. Because in 2025, a young paleontologist in Chicago set out to find the oldest tooth tissue ever, and instead discovered what all that ancient skin armor was actually for. Her name is Yara Harity, and she was working as a postdoctoral researcher in the University of Chicago laboratory of Neil Shubin, the paleontologist famous for co-discovering Tiktaalik, the fish that walked. Harity's quarry was, on its face, a record book question. She wanted to pin down the oldest vertebrate hard tissue ever preserved, which in practice meant re-examining a fossil called Anatolepis. Anatolepis is barely a fossil at all in the way most people picture one. It survives as crumbs, flakes of armor a millimeter or two across, sieved out of Cambrian rocks from places like Wyoming, on the order of 500 million years old. But since the 1970s, those crumbs had carried enormous weight, because under the microscope, their surfaces are studded with tiny tubercles, and beneath the tubercles run fine parallel tubules that generations of researchers read as dentine. Dentine, as you now know better than most dentist patients, is a calling card. If Anatolepis had it, Anatolepis was a vertebrate, the oldest one known by a comfortable margin. And the odontode story, our story, started in the Cambrian. Textbooks took the bait cautiously for decades. Harity and her colleagues put the crumbs in front of the most unforgiving referee available, a synchrotron X-ray source at Argonne National Laboratory outside Chicago, a machine that can map the internal architecture of a grain of sand in 3 dimensions down to sub-thousandth of a millimeter detail, and scanned essentially everything: Anatolepis, genuine early fish armor like Eryptychius from the Colorado sandstones, and, for comparison, a supporting cast of other small ancient fossils. The scans delivered 2 results, and the first was a demolition. The tubules inside Anatolepis, seen properly in 3 dimensions for the first time, did not match dentine after all. They matched in detail, structure after structure, something else entirely. The sensory organs found in the shells of arthropods, modern crabs, shrimp, insects, and their kin, carry small sensing structures called sensilla scattered across their cuticle, little innervated pegs and pits and hairs through which the armor feels the world. And fossil arthropods carry them too, preserved in exactly the configuration Harity's team was staring at inside the supposed first vertebrate. Anatolepis was compared side by side against fossil arthropods in the same scans, and the verdict became unavoidable. The oldest vertebrate was an arthropod, half a century of tentative textbook status, dissolved by better imaging. The crumbs from Wyoming belonged to something closer to an ancient crab relative, its armor bumps sensory pegs of a kind. Vertebrates never grew. As demotions go, it was polite, thorough, and total. And Harity has been cheerfully frank in interviews about the whiplash of hunting the first fish and bagging a crustacean cousin instead. The record for oldest vertebrate hard tissue fell back to the Ordovician armor we already met, Astraspis and Eryptychius and their kin, whose tubercles, the same scans confirmed, are built of the real thing, true dentine, around true pulp spaces. If the study had stopped there, it would have been a headline for specialists, a name crossed off a list. What makes it belong at the summit of this whole tour, and what put it in the journal Nature in May of 2025 under the title The Origin of Vertebrate Teeth and Evolution of Sensory Exoskeletons, is the second result, the one that came from asking a question demolitions usually skip. If the vertebrate armor and the arthropod armor are unrelated inventions, built from different tissues by animals on opposite sides of the animal kingdom, why did the scans keep confusing them? Why do dentine tubercles and arthropod sensilla look so alike that trained paleontologists mistook one for the other for 50 years. Convergence, yes, we've met convergence at every stop on this tour. But things converge because they're being shaped by the same job. Sensilla have a known job. They're sense organs. The armor of an arthropod works as an instrument panel, reporting touch, current, vibration. So the team turned to the vertebrate side and asked the question directly. Is dentine in armor doing the same job? Was the odontode, from the beginning, a sense organ? They tested it in the most straightforward way available. They looked at living tissue. Modern fish still wear odontodes, as you know, and the team examined the skin denticles of living fish, including armored little suckermouth catfish raised in Shubin's own lab, aquarium staples wearing the family armor, and there it was, nerve fibers running up into the denticles, wiring the armor to the nervous system. The tooth tissue bumps on the outside of a living fish are innervated, connected, reporting. Combine that with what dentine does in your own head, and the pattern closes like a well-made lock. Because there is something about human dentine that dentists live with every day. Dentine feels. Enamel is inert, but the moment cold water or a probing pick reaches dentine, sensation fires, sharp and immediate, through those thousands of microscopic tubules to the pulp's nerves. We treat that sensitivity as a design flaw, the reason ice cream can hurt. Harity's synthesis says the sensitivity is the original feature. The odontode in this reading was born as a sensory organ, a hard little antenna, part armor and part instrument, studding the shields of jawless fish so their casing could feel the water, the current, the substrate, perhaps the bow wave of the water scorpion sweeping in. Both great armored dynasties of the Cambrian and Ordovician seas, vertebrate and arthropod, converged on the same solution to the same problem: armor that can feel. On one side, Sensilla. On the other, odontodes. Two unrelated technologies, both sensory, so alike that 500 million years later, machines at a national laboratory were needed to tell them apart. Now run the tape forward from that beginning, and the entire story you've been listening to reassembles itself with a click I still find slightly spine-tingling. Sensory armor on a jawless Ordovician fish. The program spreads, or perhaps was always also inside, seeding throat linings. Either way, it's running in skins and pharynxes across tens of millions of years of jawless evolution. Jaws arrive, remodeled gill arches in need of a working edge, and the nearest available hard tissue program answers the call. The first biters, the placoderms, chew their way into the Devonian with dentine at the margins. From there, the deployments multiply into everything on tonight's tour: rows in mouths, mills in throats, launching grapples in moray gullets, blades on sawfish snouts, glass needles in dragonfish jaws, and the shark's full-body inheritance worn openly, skin to smile with no seam. And through all of it, the tissue never stopped feeling. The sawfish saw sweeping murky Florida shallows reading electric heartbeats through its studded blade is sensory armor doing its founding job with upgraded instruments, a shark's flank of denticles, tuned to the flow sliding over it. And you, wincing at a sip of ice water in a diner, are receiving a status report from a nervous connection that's run unbroken from armor plate to jawbone for something like 460 million years. Your teeth are not oddly sensitive. Your teeth are sensors, doing exactly what odontodes were apparently invented to do, and dinner just happens to be the beat they walk now. And if you want proof that the ocean still runs teeth as instruments, open, unapologetic, spectacular proof, swimming right now under the Arctic ice, consider the narwhal. Because the sensory reading of teeth turns the most famous tooth on Earth from a riddle into a punchline. The narwhal's tusk, the spiral lance that launched 1,000 unicorn myths, is a tooth, a single upper left canine that leaves the jaw pointing forward and drives straight out through the animal's upper lip into open water, growing up to 9 or 10 feet long in males. For centuries, the tusk has been an argument in search of a function, a jousting weapon, an ice pick, a status ornament, and status display almost certainly is part of the truth, since females usually go without. But the anatomy always contained a screaming clue that most explanations ignored. The tusk is inside out by normal tooth standards. Hard enamel armor on the outside, sensitive core within, is the usual arrangement. The narwhal tusk instead wears its sensitivity shallow, with millions of dentine tubules running out toward a surface layer porous enough to let seawater reach them. A team led by the Harvard dental researcher Martin Nuwaya, working with Inuit hunters and communities in the Canadian Arctic, whose traditional knowledge of narwhals framed the work, showed in 2014 that the tusk functions as a sense organ. When researchers briefly bathed the tusks of temporarily restrained narwhals in waters of different saltiness, the animal's heart rates shifted measurably with the change. A tooth, 10 feet of it, deployed through the face into open water, reading the chemistry of the sea, plausibly tracking the salinity signatures that matter enormously to an animal whose world is made of freezing leads and closing ice. Whatever else the tusk is for, and the honest answer is that the full job description is still being argued, the narwhal is a living, breathing demonstration of the claim at the heart of the 2025 work. Strip a tooth of its chewing duties, and what remains is an antenna. The unicorn horn is a nerve, wearing armor, doing oceanography. While we're giving teeth their full due as information machines, there's a quieter superpower to acknowledge, one that's been hiding in plain sight through this whole story. Teeth remember. Mineralized tissue is by far the most durable thing a vertebrate body makes, which is why the deep past we've been touring reaches us mostly as teeth and tooth-built armor. Astraspus's tubercles, Thelodont scales by the museum drawer, conodont elements so abundant they date the world's oil fields. Modern sharks make the point at industrial scale. A single shark replacing every position in its jaws on a conveyor of weeks has been estimated to shed on the order of tens of thousands of teeth across its lifetime, each one a hard, enameloid-capped time capsule raining steadily onto the seafloor, which is why shark teeth are among the most common vertebrate fossils on Earth. Why entire stretches of beach in places like Venice, Florida, are famous for yielding them by the bucket. And why we know the extinct giant megalodon almost entirely from teeth the size of a human hand. And each recovered tooth carries data inward as well: growth layers, chemistry, isotopes of the water the animal swam through. The same principle that lets researchers read a sawfish's life history from a single rostral tooth, like a flight recorder. Teeth sense the present, and then they archive it. There's something almost absurdly generous about that design. The same organ that feels the world on the animal's behalf ends up testifying about that world to scientists millions of years later. No other tissue we grow does both jobs. The imposters, meanwhile, deserve one last bow, because the counterfeit tooth also kept evolving after we left it, and its masterpiece makes everything else in the forgery portfolio look gentle. Return one final time to the radula, the mollusk tooth ribbon that drills clams and licks rocks. In one family of tropical sea snails, the cone snails, the radula stopped being a file and became ammunition. A cone snail's radular teeth are manufactured one at a time, each a single, hollow, barbed harpoon of chitin, stored in a quiver-like sac and loaded individually into an extendable proboscis. The snail scents a fish, extends that proboscis like a wandering thread, and fires, harpooning the prey and pumping venom through the hollow tooth in the same instant. The fish seizes up in moments, and the snail, an animal that couldn't chase down a fish in any universe, reels it in and swallows it whole. The tooth has become a syringe, single-use, disposable, preloaded, with the next round already racked. Some larger species, like the notorious geography cone of Indo-Pacific reefs, carry venom cocktails potent enough that human deaths, though rare, are documented from careless handling, which has earned shell collectors the grim advice that there's no safe way to hold a live one. And in one of those turns that biology seems to keep in stock for humility, components modeled on cone snail venoms have been developed into human painkillers, including an approved drug derived from a cone snail toxin used for otherwise unmanageable chronic pain. A fingernail material tooth, fired like a whaler's harpoon from a snail, ends up easing pain in hospital patients. The counterfeit tooth never once cared about being counterfeit. It was too busy winning. Set the narwhal and the cone snail side by side for a moment, because between them, they close out the argument we've been quietly assembling since the eel. The narwhal carries a true tooth, doing no chewing whatsoever, pure sensing, the founding job, gloriously unretired. The cone snail carries a fake tooth, doing something no true tooth ever managed, chemical warfare with reload capability. Location told us almost nothing tonight. Throat, stomach, skin, snout, lip, all valid addresses. Ancestry told us everything about construction and history and nothing about ambition. What a tooth is, in the end, is a commitment. A place where a body decided to meet the world hard, and to keep feeling it, and to keep records. Everything else, where it sits, what it grinds, what it senses, whom it stabs, is local hiring. You might reasonably ask what any of this says about you, beyond the poetry of sensitive molars, and the answer is more than you'd guess, some of it strange, some of it potentially worth billions of dollars to medicine. Start with the strange. The odontode program, that portable subroutine we've followed across eels and sharks in 500 million years, is installed in you. And it still behaves like a subroutine, which means that very occasionally, in human bodies, it runs at the wrong address. Medical literature has documented, many times over, teeth developing in the human nasal cavity, actual teeth, erupting inside a nose, usually discovered when a patient reports congestion that turns out to have enamel. Certain ovarian growths called teratomas, benign in the great majority of cases, arise from cells that retain the ability to form multiple tissue types, and surgeons removing them find, with some regularity, hair and fully formed teeth inside. I mention this delicately and for a precise reason. It's the human demonstration of everything this story has argued. The program is real, it is complete, it is portable, and where it runs is settled by regulation, by switches, by the address the program is handed. A shark runs the tooth subroutine across its whole body on purpose. A human occasionally runs it in a nostril by accident. Same ancient software, different deployment discipline. Now the valuable part, you get 2 sets of teeth, baby and adult, and when the second set is damaged, that's the end. The program in your jaw has shut down, and dentistry fills the gap with metal and ceramic. A shark never faces this. Its jaws hold a hidden band of tissue, the dental lamina, a strip of that same epithelial negotiating tissue we met at the very beginning, kept permanently active budding replacement teeth in rows for the animal's entire life, each new tooth folding forward into position like a round being chambered. And here's the finding that has dental researchers leaning in. When biologists, notably a group led by Gareth Fraser, then at the University of Sheffield in England, mapped the genes running that shark tooth conveyor, they reported that the network overlaps substantially with genes humans carry and use to build our own 2 sets. We don't lack the software for continuous replacement on this evidence. Ours stops calling the subroutine after the second run. The dream, and researchers in the field say it out loud, is regenerative dentistry, learning from fish that never stopped, which switches to flip so that a lost human molar could be regrown from the patient's own tissue rather than replaced with titanium. Nobody responsible promises a date, and I won't either. Between a gene map and a clinic lies a decade or 3 of hard road. but the road exists, and think about what it's paved with. The reason a shark can teach us anything about your dentist's office is the deep homology this whole story runs on. Its teeth and your teeth are one invention, separated by 400 million years of deployment decisions. Every strange address we visited tonight, every throat mill and skin shingle is a variation within a single inheritance that includes your own jaw. The moray and the molar are cousins. That sentence is the whole story in 5 words, and it is literally true. There's one more turn of perspective the story owes you, the widest one, before we close the circle on where teeth began. Pull back far enough, and teeth stop looking like body parts and start looking like one of evolution's recurring answers to a question physics keeps asking: how does soft life handle a hard world? Life is wet chemistry, gels and membranes and dissolved salts, and yet it keeps needing to cut, grind, pierce, anchor, and resist. Every lineage that faced that need reached into its own biochemical pantry. Vertebrates reached for calcium phosphate and built the odontode, and then, because the odontode could feel, it became something more than a chisel. It became a way of knowing the world through hardness, of touching without being cut. Arthropods laminated their chitin. Mollusks went metallurgical, iron and magnetite pressed into ribbon-mounted files. Echinoderms grew self-sharpening chalk. 4 pantries, 4 dentistries, and not one of them arrived at numb hardware when sensing was on offer. Even the lobster's stomach mill reports its rhythms to a governing knot of neurons. Even the limpet's iron rasp is servo-controlled muscle by muscle. Hardness without feedback is just rock. What every one of these lineages built, in its own dialect, is closer to a fingertip wearing a helmet. If there's a grand unified theory of teeth hiding under tonight's tour, that's it. And it's why the word tooth, strict definition or not, refuses to stay inside our category lines. The category was always about the job, and the job was always double: meet the world hard, and pay attention while you do. Which is why the fossil record's actual answer about where our kind of tooth began lands with such quiet force when you finally hold all of it in one hand. Run the whole half-billion-year film in reverse one last time, slowly. The braces come off a teenager in Ohio. Megalodon's hand-sized blades sink back into Miocene seas. The placoderms unbite the first bite. Jaws dissolve back into gill arches. And now watch the teeth themselves. They migrate, position by position, back over the jaw margins, out of every mouth, and settle onto the outsides of small, jawless, mud-sifting fish, spreading across their shields as fields of tiny, sensing bumps. Dentine antennas listening to Ordovician water. Hold the film there. That frame, as best as the accumulated evidence from the rocks, the embryos, and the gene maps, can currently establish, and stated with the honesty the open questions deserve, is the beginning. The throat whorls of Loganellia keep a genuine asterisk alive. The conodonts guard their own strange counterstory, and science reserves the right, as it must, to recut this film as new fossil surface. But the picture the field's own referees now describe runs one way. The tissue is oldest on the outside. The skin came first, feeling before biting, armor before appetite. So let me give you the whole answer in plain language, the way I'd explain it across a table, because after all these animals, the answer can finally be said simply and mean something. Why do ocean animals grow teeth in their throats, their stomachs, their skin? 3 reasons, braided together. The first is physics. Hard contact with the world happens everywhere, and every place it happens is a place where hardware earns its keep. A fish's throat handles every meal the mouth wins, so a throat that can crush turns whole categories of armored, spiny, defended food into groceries. That's the sheephead's nutcracker and the parrotfish's mill, and it's the lobster's stomach mill too. because a stomach sits on the same conveyor, an arthropod cuticle happened to be the material in the pantry. Skin, meanwhile, spends a lifetime in contact with water, rock, parasites, and other animals' intentions. So skin that's armored, quiet, and fast repays its cost daily. That's the shark's suit. The second reason is development. The true tooth is a portable subroutine, written once and callable anywhere the right tissues meet. So evolution has never needed to reinvent teeth to relocate them, only to flip regulatory switches, and lineages have been flipping them, on, off, elsewhere, for 500 million years. The moray's launching gullet jaws, the sawfish's blade, the denticle, and the molar. Deployment decisions. All of them. And the third reason is the one I didn't see coming when I started pulling on this thread. The one the newest science delivered. The tissue itself began as a sense organ on the body's exterior, so its presence out on the surface, in the flow, at the front line, is simply the oldest habit the tissue has, older than jaws and older than appetite. Teeth grow in strange places in the end, because our idea of the normal place was wrong. The strangeness was always in us, in the assumption that the mouth owns them. It costs nothing to admit where the story stays unfinished, and a story this old owes its audience the ledger. The parrotfish sand figures are estimates, honest ranges built from feeding rates, and they vary by species, size, and reef. Treat the hundreds of pounds numbers as well-grounded approximations, and treat any suspiciously precise figure you hear anywhere with a smile. The narwhal tusk's full job description remains actively argued. The salinity sensing result stands, the mating display role is well supported, and how the animal weighs those functions day to day is an open question that Arctic fieldwork is still chipping at. The moray's double bite has been documented in detail in the species Meta filmed, and the mechanism is anatomically general across morays. But the family is large and mostly unfilmed at that level, and biology has earned our caution about extrapolating from any single well-lit case. Loganellia's throat whirls, still await the fossil that will settle what they mean. The Conodont Minority Report remains filed. And the sensory armor synthesis of 2025 is young, powerful, and will spend the next decade being tested by exactly the kind of imaging that created it, which is how it should be. And I'd bet on refinement rather than reversal, though the Cambrian has embarrassed confident people before. Every one of these open edges is part of the architecture. A science with no open edges has stopped being one. And unfinished cuts the other way too, because the ocean is still writing this story forward right now in living bodies. Every strange address we visited is a going concern under active selection. Somewhere off a reef tonight? A moray is threading a crevice with its second jaws riding shotgun, and the slow grind of generations is still tuning the length of those muscle slings. In the deep scattering layer, dragonfish are field-testing transparent enamel against the eyesight of prey whose own optics are evolving back. On a Pacific rock shelf, a chiton is laying down magnetite at ocean temperature with a precision our factories envy, and a limpet beside it is spinning iron fibers finer than light. The pink urchins are flaking themselves sharp in the dark. Sawfish, if we're careful and a little lucky, are recovering tooth by unreplaceable tooth in the Everglades backcountry. The counterfeiters are innovating. The originals are innovating. The arms race that started when the first armored thing met, the first thing that could crack armor, has never once paused for breath. We tend to talk about evolution in the past tense, as something that produced the world and retired. Teeth, of all things, are one of the clearest places to watch it in the present tense, because teeth sit exactly where bodies meet the world, and that frontier never closes. Come back in 10 million years, and the addresses will have shuffled again, and some future mind may puzzle over teeth in places we have no word for yet. And the explanation, whatever its details, will be the same three-braided answer: physics, portability, and a tissue that was born to feel. I keep returning, though, To the sensing because of everything this subject handed over. That's the part that followed me out of the research and refused to leave. We're pattern-seeking creatures, and the pattern we had for teeth was so confident, so daily, so brushed twice and flossed that it took particle accelerators and Cambrian crumbs to break it. Hardness in the service of appetite. That was the whole story we told. And the older, truer story was sitting in our own nerve endings the entire time, filed under toothache. Every mouth in the ocean, every mouth at your dinner table is ringed with organs that began their existence reading the water for ancient danger, and they've never stopped transmitting. We simply stopped thinking of the signal as information and started calling it sensitivity, a nuisance, a reason to switch toothpaste. 500 million years of unbroken sentry duty, demoted to a commercial break. If there's a lesson in that beyond the biology, and I think there is, it's about how much of the deep past stands in plain sight wearing the costume of the ordinary, waiting for someone to ask the right question about the wrong-looking detail. A second jaw in a throat, a tooth in a stomach, a chill in a molar. So here, at the end, is the inversion the whole journey has been carrying you toward, the one that was hiding inside the question all along. We began with what looked like a collection of anomalies: teeth in throats, teeth in stomachs, teeth in skin, teeth on snouts, each one framed by the very shape of the question as an escapee, a wanderer, a strange exception to the sensible rule that teeth live in mouths. Every aquarium placard, every dental poster, every children's book about smiles takes that rule as bedrock. And the accumulated evidence of the rocks, the embryos, the gene maps, and the newest imaging says the bedrock is upside down. The skin is the old country. The dentine and pulp organ spent its first tens of millions of years out on the body's surface, in its thousands, sensing and shielding, on animals that couldn't bite anything, and the interior deployments came after, wherever the program found work. On that reading, the shark is the conservative of the family, still wearing the ancestral estate, running the original sensory armor over every inch of its body the way its ancestors always did, with the jaw margin teeth as one specialized district among thousands. The moray's throat grapples, the parrotfish's mill, the sawfish's electric blade, provincial industries, each one a local franchise of a program far older than any mouth that hosts it. And the human smile, the thing we treat as the definition, the headquarters, the natural home of teeth, is revealed as the opposite of ancient. The mouth is the colonized territory. It's the frontier town that grew so successful, so famous, so central to the business of being an animal with appetite that everyone forgot it was ever a frontier, forgot the vast old homeland out on the skin, forgot that the settlers arrived from somewhere. Your teeth are immigrants. They crossed into the mouth somewhere in the Silurian dark. They kept their nerves and their old habit of listening, and they've been running the port of entry for everything you've ever eaten while carrying, in every tubule. The passport stamps of the border, they came over 400 million years before you were born. Once you hold the inversion, you can't give it back. And it quietly recolors the ordinary. Tomorrow morning, you'll stand at a sink and brush your teeth, a chore so automatic you'll think about the day ahead instead, and somewhere under the mint in the routine, there will be this: your polishing sensory armor. The last 32 pieces your species still deploys of an organ system that once covered whole bodies, tuned by 500 million years of contact between soft life and a hard world. The enamel under your brush is the same invention that goes transparent in a dragonfish, launches from a moray's throat, reads salt through a narwhal's lance, and rains, tooth by shed tooth, onto the floors of every ocean as the most durable record any vertebrate leaves behind. Most of the story of life never fossilizes, never survives, never reaches us at all. Teeth do. Teeth are how the deep past shakes hands with the present, and you have a working set, still wired, still reporting, still flinching honestly at ice water like a sentry that never got the order to stand down. I've spent this whole journey in other animals' bodies, and yet the fact I keep arriving back at is that one. The strangest teeth in the ocean and the ones in your head are a single unbroken thing, and knowing that changes which of them counts as ordinary. None of them is the answer. There is no ordinary tooth anywhere on Earth, and there never has been. And that seems like the right note to leave you on, standing at that sink with the deep Ordovician humming in your gums. This channel exists for exactly this kind of journey, taking one innocent-looking question about the ocean and following it down, past the trivia, past the headlines, to the place where it quietly rearranges how you see your own body on a Tuesday morning. If tonight did that for you, if somewhere between the lobster's stomach and the Cambrian crumbs a piece of furniture moved in your head, then leave a like on the way past. It costs you a second. It tells us the digging was worth doing. And it's the plainest thanks a story assembled out of synchrotrons and tide pools can get. Subscribing is how you make sure the next deep dive surfaces in your feed instead of vanishing into the dark like an unlit dragonfish. There's a whole series of these voyages here already, and more being researched as you listen. But what I really want from you is in the comments, and I want something specific. Every one of us walked away from this story carrying one fact that won't sit still. The one you're already composing into a sentence for whoever eats dinner with you next. Whether it's the snail with the strongest teeth on the planet, the eel with the second bite, the tusk that tastes the sea, or the armor that learned to ache. Go write yours below in one sentence as if you were telling it across the table, and then scroll through everyone else's and watch the whole tour reassemble itself out of 1,000 different favorite pieces. Those threads become the best room in the house. A crowd of people comparing which strange address rearranged them. And half the pleasure of finishing a story like this one is finding out which detail belonged to somebody else. The ocean holds more stories like this one. Stranger addresses, older inventions, and we're nowhere near the bottom. Until the next descent, mind where you put your hands in the tide pools, be kind to the wandering meatloaf, and take good care of your armor. You've been wearing it, after all, for 500 million years.